Normally, when I ask the viewers if they'd like to see a video, I don't really get a response this massive. What's up, everyone? Today we're going to be taking a look, well, not really taking a look, we're going to be talking about some tips for Legion. So you guys already have had Legion come out in global for about 5 days now, and I'm sure a lot of you have already built up your experiences and are kind of starting to see patterns of like how you should be playing and how it's different from Break right until now. But I think going into Legion, the game changes a fair bit in how you kind of act and what you prioritize. It's no longer a game of who can, you know, push each other to 4 damage first, and it becomes more of a game of like looking at resources and kind of like keeping track of what goes back to the deck, what goes out of the deck, and things like that. And so I wanted to do a little video just kind of talking about everything and, you know, going over some tips for you guys for this format. Also, I think a lot of global players will definitely be aware of this name, but I'm doing a special collab video with Shiroyasha from you might know him from the Morikawa Discord that organized a lot of the big events for the global server. You know, they do a lot of the big like money events. They just had their championship recently that me and Kai commentated, and we're doing an interview with Shiroyasha, and so I do have some of my own questions that I'll be asking, but at the same time, if you want to also join and, you know, post some of your own questions, I've started a hashtag called Ask Shiroyasha on Twitter, and you can write them down in Twitter, and then I'll probably be picking some of the more popular ones, so make sure if you see some good questions to drop likes on them. You can also write them in the comments here in this video too, and I'll try to go through them, but please do tag them with the hashtag so that it's easier for me to find them when I actually do search for it. You have about a week or so to do that, I think maybe until next Wednesday at most, and so after that we're going to be sitting down with Shiroyasha to ask some of those questions, so look forward to seeing what you guys have to ask. I also want to take this chance to thank this month's channel members as well, so huge thank you to Crowned Clown, Very Flores, Platinum Wolf 2009, Christian, Carrie Barger, Arcana Master, Tristan H, Martinich 67, Cardinal Joker, Michael Lockett, The Real ZBD, Erika, Jet Lee, Stogan, Mr. Gamerline 1, Zach S, Bradley Dyson, Lucifer2299, Hassan Iqbal, Lindo1332, Preeper66, and Jan Fish. Thank you so much for supporting the content and the channel. We do YouTube member exclusive remote fight tournaments for all 3 formats of the Vanguard TCG, and you also have access to a special Discord channel and stuff like that, where you get to find out a lot of my upcoming content and, you know, in general, just kind of like a lot of behind the scenes stuff. So thank you so much to the YouTube channel members. You guys definitely, you know, a lot of your support does mean a lot. So anyway, let's talk about Legion now. Enough of other, you know, kind of like outside factors. So I think the first thing that a lot of us kind of thought about when going into Legion is, of course, the fact that, you know, the Legion requirements are, you know, going first, you can perform Legion on your 4th turn, going second, you can perform on your 3rd turn, and you perform Legion by, you know, when you have the Legion grade 3, like let's say Think Saver, you can choose 4 cards from your drop zone, put them back into your deck, and then Legion with the Legion mate, which in this case would be Blaster Blade Seeker, and they're both on the Vanguard circle, and there you go, you're in Legion. Simple as that, right? But of course, that requirement of 4 cards in the drop zone for a lot of people was like, oh, well, I can just overcall a bunch of stuff and then fill up my drop zone like that, you know, especially if you have a lot of triggers in the hand. And while that is true, it's not exactly the recommended kind of behavior that you should be doing to fill up your drop zone, because in the end, every single card in Zero is still valuable, even though you can't guard from hand the way you can in the TCG, and therefore, you know, you might think, oh, every card isn't as valuable in TCG. It's still important because with the way that Intercept works, you're finding yourself replacing the cards in your field all the time, and so I don't recommend, like, for example, if you have 2 cards in drop zone, to like call 2 grade 3s and then overcall them again by, you know, you commit 3 cards just to basically like have 1 remain on board and 2 of them go back to your deck. It's like, yeah, you'll check them as triggers, but at the same time, it's not bad to just like take things a little bit slower to avoid that. If you want a more efficient way to fill up your drop zone without actually minusing yourself, you can run Soul Blast cards. There's plenty of old cards that we completely forgot about. Hell, I see Royal Paladin players playing Soul Saver Dragon of all things that you can use to Soul Blast to fill up that drop zone a bit earlier, and then that way you're not minusing yourself to do it, and, you know, it's pretty nice. Cards like Lian and Gojo that rest themselves to discard 1, drop 1 suddenly are really nice. Sorry, discard 1, draw 1. They're suddenly really nice simply because you are not minusing yourself, you are filling up your drop zone, you're also going through your deck, so you're finding out other combo pieces that you would need for future turns. There's also cards like Airmo, for example, the ones that say like on boost if it hit, discard one, draw one. Those cards are pretty nice, especially like in Narukami, you run that in brawlers because you hit multiple times with the Vanguard. And so instead of overcalling your stuff in order to fill up the drop zone, like maybe if you really have like a 9-card hand and you have like a 3-card drop zone, then there are situations where it's okay, but generally you don't want to be doing it. Generally, it's better to avoid doing that and use cards like Lien, Airmo, you know, Soul Blast cards and stuff like that to fill up that drop zone. And especially if your clan has access to something like, you know, Soul Blast 2 draw a card or Soul Blast 2 countercharge 2, that is really nice. Like that, in that case, that's super good. Another thing is you don't need to rush to Legion as early as possible. Like, sure, going second, you can Legion as early as your turn 3, but there are times where it's better to take things a bit slower, especially if you have Legions with abilities that only work when they are legioned with, right? So for example, like, you know, something like the Wingle Seeker is great to Legion whenever, right? Because adding, you know, calling a card from your deck is going to be great no matter when. But then there's things like Thinksaver, for example, that, you know, using Thinksaver early isn't really going to push your opponent too much. So it's like if you had to ride the Thinksaver early and, you know, you don't have any other great 3s in hand, like sure, Legioning with it, like the multi-attack is nice, but it's much more punishing when your opponent's at high damage counts where the defensives don't shut down your other attacks as much, and you can really get that like full-on push really, really well. That's why also a lot of decks still run like break rides. For example, like Genesis still runs Angelica, at least in JP, because that way if you see that you need to take it a bit slower, you can go into the break ride, sit on it, like build up whatever resources you need to, and then go use the break ride effect, especially in cases like Genesis where the break ride soul blasts and you put that break ride as a heal trigger, you can soul blast it out and then put it right back into the deck. So that way you're not like rushing and like wasting your resources to get to Legion, but rather you're taking things a bit slower while still advancing the game plan, and then your break ride into Legion is actually very impactful. So consider those kind of plays too in clans where it's worth it. Obviously in Royals, in Seekers, I wouldn't really recommend that, but in clans like, you know, right now it would be Genesis, later on Shadows and Link Joker. There's quite a few clans that want to take things a bit slower, so it's not really worth like completely rushing into it either. And it's not just break rides, there's other good like limit break era cards that you want to be running. In Liberators, when they get their Legion, it's going to be quite fine to still run like Garmor and just sit on Garmor for a bit before you go into your Legion, because it's still an amazing card, right? It's not a break ride, but it's still a great card that you want to sit on, and then maybe go into your Bluish Flame Legions. Now, speaking of Bluish Flames, you guys at Global especially have a huge advantage in that you know every set that's coming out 3 months in advance, and we now have found out in JP that our current set is the last set of Legion, so there's only going to be 4 total sets of Legion, and therefore you can look ahead and see what you want. Now, I've seen quite a lot of people say like, oh, I'm going to skip Legion entirely and I'm just going to play G, but one thing that's important to consider is that like we don't know the effects of the G cards yet in, you know, Zero itself, but in early G in the TCG, Legion decks were dominating the meta. Like Legion decks were still by far the best and were the strongest. They just put some strides in and that was it. And so I can imagine that we're gonna have the same kind of pattern in Zero as well, where the G decks themselves, like Chronojet, Asha, All-Mile, etc., won't get too good for a while, but on the other hand, the Legion decks that incorporate strides will be very strong. So I would say, even if you're not too excited about Legion itself, you should still maybe like think about building 1 or 2 decks for like your favorite clans, or clans that use a lot of old support and you just like slot in a few new cards, like Liberators, for example. Kagero, honestly, is like mostly old stuff as well. You might want to build 1 or 2 decks where like having them will be good for you, not just in Legion these 4 months, but also when you go into G as well. The other nice thing of looking ahead of the schedule is like you can think about what decks you want to build. Obviously, you guys have always had this, you know, to be able to look ahead and think of what you want to build, but also right now in the early Legion sets, a lot of Liberate decks are still really good. Like Liberators are still really strong even after the nerf. Yes, indeed, in JP they were still topping all the time. Pale Moon Silverthorns are still great. You know, Kagero is still amazing. So a lot of the Limit Break decks are still really good and can fight against the Legion decks pretty well. Sure, you lack the like trigger recycling that Legion has, but you still have a solid chance to fight, and I think for that reason it is worth to just keep using those decks and not rush into the first set of Legion. Wait for the decks that you like and the clans that you like to get their support, and so don't like waste your gems in necessarily trying to build Seekers or Brawlers and stuff like that unless you really do want to play them. Back to gameplay now though, one thing I would also kind of say is Obviously, you're keeping track of your own drop zone and your own triggers and stuff when doing Legion yourself, but also keep track of your opponent's stuff, right? If one has like 2 cards in drop, but they call 2 grade 3 rear guards that are like heal triggers, obviously they're trying to kind of bait you to attack into them and like put them into the drop zone for them with an attack rather than them overcalling them themselves. So try to keep track of what's in your opponent's drop zone and what's on their field, because they might just be trying to bait you with something that you kind of retire or attack into, and then basically get them to Legion it back free of charge. So think about that, keep track of your opponent's stuff, keep track of like how many PGs in their drop zone, heals, you know, other triggers in their drop zone, and think about how much stuff is going to be going back. Especially with PGs, you know, sometimes they'll like PG 3 times, put all of them back, and then check a bajillion draws, and then suddenly get them all back to hand. So it's pretty important to keep track of what they have and also what you are putting back to their deck by attacking into them. One thing we also saw in some decks is running old Perfect Guards. So this is not the like break ride Perfect Guards that were introduced from the Link Joker season onwards, but rather the ones that work, that like, let's say your opponent attacks with a crit when you're at 3, those ones, like the really old ones. The reason why I say that is because now some decks, like Brawlers for example, don't run Limb Break cards, and instead, you know, everything is Limb Break free, so you don't care about being at 4 damage anymore. But, of course, the downside there is, if your opponent attacks with a crit when you're at 3, you are being damage denied as well from using your skills, and so you have to carefully consider if it's worth or not. I think some decks, it is worth to run the old ones just because they don't use as much Counter Blast, but sometimes it's still better. And of course, let's not forget about archetypes. You know, some of these new decks are also getting archetype exclusive PGs, so you have to consider that as well, if it's worth it or not in those cases. And this one's obvious, and I think I've talked about it a lot, but try to return triggers as much as possible. This also comes back to like not rushing into Legion. If your drop zone is just like a bunch of random grade 1s and 2s and you're gonna Legion that back, if it was like 1 turn later and you'd be Legioning back, you know, like 3 heals in a draw, or like 2 heals and 2 draws, or like 2 heals a draw in a PG, like those are much better cards to have back in your deck compared to like, you know, drawing into just like a random grade 1 that's like a Gojo, for example. It's like, yeah, Gojo is cool, but on like turn 6, I don't really want to be seeing this. I'd rather be like, you know, triggering or maybe drawing into another grade 3 to Legion again, or if anything, like drawing into PGs, right? It's always going to be great. So it sounds like a bit of a Mr. Obvious kind of tip, but still worth putting out there. And my final tip I could really think about is hold an extra Legion grade 3 in your hand, especially when the game gets long, because you don't always have to do this, because obviously triggers in deck is always going to be better, or like as attackers on rear guard, but there are times when the deck starts to get thin and you need to start Legioning back stuff. And also when you do Legion back stuff when your deck is thin, be careful how many draws you put back. I've had plenty of games where I go up against people who like Legion with 4 cards left in deck, put back 4 draws, and then just deck out, right? They just check all their draws on attack, defense, and everything, and just deck out entirely. So be careful what you put back. It might be more worth just like put back a few heals and maybe just like some PGs or something, or even normal units, and try to not deck out. But having an extra copy of a Legion in your hand can be really good, and also keep track of your Legion mates to make sure that like you don't re-ride and try to Legion and all your Legion mates are in the soul or in the damage, and suddenly you're screwed. One last plus alpha extra tip is, of course, when it comes to crafting and pulling, when you pull a Legion leader, the grade 3, you will always automatically get the Legion mate as well. And this is nice because if you open a lot of packs, you'll get a lot of extra, you know, currency for crafting stuff. But of course, keep in mind that you cannot, like when you craft the Legion leader, the Legion mate does not come with it, so you'll need the extra materials. So make sure you factor that in when you think about how many crafting materials you will need for cards, because again, you can check all the cards that are out in JP through websites like Vanguard Zero Meta, and there you will see, you know, which cards are double rare, which cards are triple rare, and how many crafting materials you need. So use all the information available to you to plan ahead very, very well. And that's basically it. Those are the main tips that I could really come up with for Legion. I think some of them are pretty obvious, but some of them might not be as obvious, especially for players that never played in Legion back in the TCG. If you guys found this video helpful, please do let me know. If there's other tips that I also missed out, feel free to leave them in the comments and I'll try to get back to them, or, you know, like upvote the ones that I definitely feel like should have been said as well. So let me know what you guys think and any other tips you guys might have for the players going into Legion for the first time. Anyway, y'all, that's gonna be it for me today. As usual, if you like the video, please like it. If you like the content, please do subscribe. I do appreciate it very much. Bell buttons and all those good things are also very much appreciated. But otherwise, that's gonna be it for me today, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.